Variant, Standard, Title, Part 1, The Beginning, The Space Between Our Doors. ID, 64923. She was my neighbor, but that night, the space between our doors disappeared. It started with the faint sound of her record player through the wall, a soft hum of jazz that drifted into my apartment like a thought I wasn't supposed to have. I'd heard it before, late at night, when the rest of the building went quiet. But that evening, it sounded closer. Or maybe I was just listening differently. Her name was Elena. 40-something, maybe mid-40s, though she carried herself with a stillness that made time seem irrelevant. She always left her door half open when she watered her plants, sunlight spilling across the hall like an invitation. I'd catch glimpses, her hands brushing against the leaves, her hair pulled back, her laugh too soft to fully catch. We'd exchange the usual neighbor things, polite hellos, a few shared elevator rides, awkward smiles when our mail got mixed up. Nothing more. Until the power went out that night. The hallway was dark, the kind that makes you aware of your own breathing. I stepped out, phone flashlight cutting a narrow beam through the shadows. That's when I saw her, barefoot, holding a candle, her face glowing amber in the flicker. "Looks like we're the only ones awake," she said, voice calm but carrying a trace of something else, something like relief. I smiled, a little too slowly. "Guess so. I was just checking the breaker." She tilted her head, studying me for a beat longer than normal. "You always volunteer for things no one asked you to do?" The question lingered between us, heavier than it should have been. I shrugged, trying to sound casual. "Just restless, I guess." She laughed quietly. "Restless," she repeated, tasting the word as if it belonged to her now. The candlelight wavered, throwing soft shadows across her collarbone, the delicate line of her throat. My eyes followed before I could stop them. "Come in," she said. "The light's better in here. Or at least warmer." I hesitated. Her door stood open just enough for her scent, faint jasmine and something older, like rain-soaked wood, to reach me. The sensible part of me knew to keep distance, to stay polite. But the quiet hum of her record player was still running on battery, and the music had that slow, deliberate rhythm that made standing still feel impossible. Inside, her living room was half lit by candles, uneven little islands of light that made every shadow look alive. She poured wine without asking, handed me a glass, and settled onto the couch like she'd been expecting me all along. "Strange night," she murmured, eyes tracing the rim of her glass. I nodded, unsure if she meant the blackout or something else entirely. The air between us felt different, charged, cautious. She asked me about my work, my hours, my age, each question landing softer than the last, but with a purpose she didn't name. Her hand brushed mine once when she reached for the bottle. Once was enough. For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The record skipped faintly in the background, the kind of imperfection that made the moment feel more real. "I didn't know you liked jazz," I said finally. She smiled, half smirk, half confession. "There's a lot you don't know." And then, a sound. The hallway lights flickered back to life, the sudden brightness spilling through her open door. We both turned toward it, but neither of us moved. She set her glass down slowly. "Looks like the night's over," she said, though she didn't sound convinced. I opened my mouth to reply, but she was already standing, her hand resting on the doorframe, eyes steady on mine. "Good night," she whispered. And for the first time, her door closed completely. Variant, Standard, Title, Part 2, Expanding the Conflict, The Line Between Doors. ID, 64924. The next morning, I tried to convince myself it had been nothing. A strange night, a shared blackout, a neighborly moment stretched a little too long. But when I opened my door for the mail, hers opened at the same time. She stood there holding a mug, hair loosely tied, wearing an oversized sweater that looked borrowed from someone's past. "Morning," she said, voice still soft from sleep. "Morning," I replied, but it came out rougher than I meant. For a second, either of us moved. Then she smiled, a slow, knowing thing that somehow made me feel both young and transparent. We talked about the blackout, the way the power company took forever to fix things. She laughed at her own impatience, saying she'd nearly burned a book cover trying to read too close to the candle. Her laugh was light, but her eyes weren't. When she mentioned her ex-husband, it slipped out mid-sentence, like a detail she hadn't planned to share. "He used to handle the fuses," she said, then went quiet, almost embarrassed by the mention. I wanted to ask what happened but didn't. Maybe she saw the question anyway, because her tone shifted, careful, but not cold. "We were good at pretending we were fine. Some people live whole lives like that." There was a pause, long enough to hear the hum of the fridge, the faint echo of someone walking 2 floors above. "I guess pretending takes energy," I said. She looked up then, something flickering behind her expression. "You say that like you know." I didn't answer. I just sipped from the coffee she'd handed me without asking. Over the next week, our paths crossed more often, too often to be coincidence. Laundry room, lobby, the small grocery down the block. Each time, the silence between words felt heavier. One night, I helped her carry groceries upstairs. She fumbled with her keys, her fingers brushing against mine when she finally turned the lock. The contact was nothing, just skin on skin, but it stayed longer than it should have. Inside, the air was warm with the smell of cooking, garlic, rosemary, red wine. "Stay for dinner," she said before I could think of a reason not to. I did. We ate quietly at her kitchen table, the light dim, the air thick with unspoken things. She asked about my family, short answers, long pauses. When I asked about hers, she hesitated. "My daughter's in college," she said finally. "She thinks I'm happier than I am." The words landed softly but stayed sharp. Later, when I stood to leave, she reached out instinctively, fingers catching my sleeve. For a heartbeat, she didn't let go. The look she gave me wasn't an invitation. It was a warning. But her hand didn't move. Neither did I. The room felt smaller, the silence louder. Her thumb brushed against my wrist once, deliberate, trembling, and then she stepped back, almost as if she'd startled herself. "Good night," she murmured, voice low, unsure. And though I walked out the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that something between us had already crossed it. Variant, standard, title, Part 3, heightening suspense, almost. ID, 64925. It happened on a rainy afternoon, the kind that makes the whole city sound like it's whispering. I was on my balcony, half reading, half listening to the steady rhythm of water hitting metal, when I heard her door creak open. "Elena?" I called before I could stop myself. She appeared in the doorway, holding a mug of tea, her sweater sleeves pushed up, eyes half lit by the gray outside. "You're always around when it rains," she said. "So are you." Her smile flickered, part amusement, part recognition. "Maybe that's the problem." I didn't answer. She leaned against the railing, close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating from her even through the cool air. We stood there in silence, watching the rain blur the world below. Then my phone buzzed. A message from a friend, coming over in 10. "Need your notes." I glanced at the screen, thumb hesitating. She caught the look. "Expecting someone?" "Yeah," I said too quickly. "Just a friend." Something in her expression changed, barely, but enough to make my chest tighten. "Then I should go," she said softly. She turned to leave, but I stopped her without thinking. "You don't have to." The words hung there, ridiculous and too honest. She froze, hands still on the railing. "You shouldn't say things like that." "Why not?" "Because I'll believe you." The rain grew louder between us. She didn't move away, but she didn't look at me either. I stepped closer, close enough that the faint scent of her perfume, jasmine and rain again, filled the space between us. Her breath caught just once. "Do you ever think about—" I started, but the knock on my door cut me off. Sharp, familiar. We both went still. Her eyes widened, lips parting slightly, the smallest tremor in her voice. That's your friend, isn't it? I nodded. For a heartbeat, either of us knew what to do. The air felt charged, almost dangerous, as if one wrong movement would make everything real. The knock came again, louder this time. She exhaled shakily. Go, she whispered. I didn't move. My hand brushed her wrist, a second, maybe less, but the contact made her inhale sharply. Her skin was warm, her pulse fast. You should really go, she said again, though her voice had softened, almost pleading. I stepped back just enough to breathe, then turned and opened the door. My friend stood there, soaked from the rain, asking something about class schedules. I barely heard. Behind me, I sensed Elena move, quiet as a shadow. When I turned again, she was gone, her door closed, lights dimmed. Later that night, a folded note slid under my door. No signature, just her handwriting. We were lucky the rain was louder than we were. I read it 3 times before sliding it into my desk drawer, and left it there, knowing I'd open it again. Variant, standard, title, Part 4, nearing the climax, the edge of it. ID, 64926. I hadn't seen her in 3 days. 3 long, restless nights where I caught myself listening for her footsteps in the hallway. Then, on the 4th evening, I found her door open, just a crack, and the faint hum of a record playing inside. Same song as that first night. I stood there too long before knocking. She looked up when I entered, her expression unreadable, eyes a little red, a glass of wine half empty beside her. You shouldn't keep showing up like this, she said quietly. You keep leaving the door open. That's not an invitation. It feels like one. She laughed, but it came out tight. You're too young to think everything means something. Maybe, I said, stepping closer. But you're too old to pretend it doesn't. Her breath hitched, a flash of anger or desire or both. The silence that followed felt heavy, pulsing. She turned away first, setting her glass down with trembling fingers. You don't understand what this would look like, she said, voice low. You'd regret it. Would you? That stopped her. Her shoulders rose, then fell, as if she were fighting herself. I already do, she whispered. I moved closer, close enough to see the fine line of her pulse at her throat. You don't mean that. She turned then, suddenly, her face inches from mine. You think this is simple? You think I don't see how people look at me already? You don't know what it's like to be the one who should know better. Her voice cracked at the last word. I didn't say anything, I just reached up and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. She closed her eyes at the touch, a soft sound escaping her throat, almost a sigh. When she opened them again, everything had changed. Her hand rose to my chest, fingers pressing lightly through the fabric, as if testing whether I was real. You should go, she said, though her hand didn't move. I can't. The air between us grew hot, electric. I could smell the faint sweetness of her perfume, the wine on her breath, the rain still clinging to her hair. Every part of me wanted to close the space that was left. You don't know what you're asking for, she murmured. Then tell me. She shook her head, but she didn't step back. You'll ruin it. Maybe it's already ruined. For a moment, neither of us breathed. Her eyes dropped to my mouth, brief, involuntary. My hand slid to the back of her neck, and she didn't stop me. The world felt suspended, like everything had gone still just for us. Then, from outside, the sharp sound of a door slamming echoed down the hall. We both flinched, her hand slipping from my chest, my breath catching mid-motion. The record skipped once, twice, and then kept playing. She whispered, barely audible. If you stay, everything changes. I didn't answer. I just stood there, inches away, waiting to see who would move first. Variant, standard, title, Part 5, The Twist, Things We Don't Say. ID, 64927. The next morning, a note was taped to my door, her handwriting again, but this time it wasn't delicate. The letters were quick, uneven. Asterisk, we need to talk. Not here. Asterisk, I found her at the cafe 2 blocks away, sitting by the window, sunglasses on even though the day was overcast. She didn't smile when I sat down. "Someone saw you leave my apartment," she said quietly, still staring out at the street. My stomach dropped. "Who?" "The landlord's wife. She asked me if I was helping the college kids with rent." I swore under my breath. She winced at the sound. "I told her you were fixing my Wi-Fi," she said, voice flat. "But she didn't believe it. She'll tell someone. She always does." The space between us felt suddenly too open, too exposed. I reached for my coffee just to have something to do with my hands. "You don't have to protect me," I said. Her laugh was bitter. "It's not you I'm worried about. You can walk away from this and people will forget in a week." "I can't." I watched her fingers tighten around the cup, the tremor in her wrist. "So what now?" She finally turned to look at me. "We stop before it turns into something we can't fix." The words hit harder than I expected. I nodded slowly, but neither of us moved to leave. The rain outside had started again, streaking the window in silver lines. I watched one slide down the glass, then another, until her reflection blurred into mine. "Was it ever just curiosity for you?" she asked suddenly. "No." Her jaw tightened. "Then I made it worse." "No, you made it real." She looked at me for a long moment, then took off her sunglasses. Her eyes were red again, not from wine this time. "I shouldn't have written that first note," she said. "I knew what I was doing." I shook my head. "You were just being kind." She gave a quiet, humorless laugh. "Don't make it smaller than it was." The silence that followed was heavy with everything we weren't saying. She brushed her thumb along the rim of her cup, a slow, nervous motion that drew my attention to her hand, the same one that had touched my face the night before. When she stood, her coat brushed against my arm, a whisper of fabric that felt more intimate than a kiss. "We can't see each other like this anymore," she said. But she didn't move away. Her body was still turned toward me, her breath close enough to feel. I looked up at her, voice low. "Then tell me to stop." She froze, eyes flicking over mine, searching. Her throat moved as she swallowed hard. "I can't," she said finally, almost breaking. And just like that, the decision was made, not with a kiss, not with words, but with the space either of us could step back into. Variant, standard, title, Part 6, the climax, the moment between. ID, 64928. It was late, the kind of quiet that feels heavier than sound. I was half asleep when I heard her knock. 3 slow taps. Then silence. When I opened the door, she stood there, no umbrella, rain dripping from her hair onto her coat. Her eyes found mine like she'd rehearsed it, no pretense left. "I couldn't sleep," she said. I stepped aside without a word. She walked in, dripping water onto the floor, clutching her arms like she'd only just realized how cold she was. The air between us was thick, close. The rain outside muffled everything except our breathing. "I told myself I wouldn't come here," she murmured, gaze fixed on the floor. "That I'd wait until it passed." "Did it?" She shook her head slowly. "No. It got worse." Her voice trembled on the last word, and I felt something inside me give. I reached for the towel hanging by the door, holding it out to her, but she didn't take it. Instead, she looked up, really looked, as if trying to decide what breaking felt like. "Say something," she whispered. I swallowed hard. "If I say it, it won't stop." "Then don't stop." I didn't know who moved first. Maybe we both did. 1 second we were standing apart. The next, she was close enough that her breath brushed against my neck. Her hands hesitated at my shoulders, trembling, not from cold now, but from the weight of what she was doing. "You don't have to," I started, but she cut me off with a shake of her head. "This isn't about have to." Her voice was soft but steady, the kind of calm that comes only after too much resisting. I reached up, brushing my fingers along her jaw, tracing the line where her pulse beat fast and unsteady. She leaned into the touch, not all the way, just enough to make me feel her warmth. For a moment, the world narrowed to the sound of rain and the space between us. I could smell her perfume again, faint, familiar, electric now. Her eyes lifted to mine. "You'll regret this," she said, barely audible. "Maybe," I whispered back. "But not tonight." She exhaled, a sound somewhere between a sigh and surrender. Her forehead rested against mine, and for a few seconds, we just breathed the same air, no words, no pretense, just the quiet realization of everything we'd both avoided saying. When her hand finally slid down to find mine, our fingers tangled like it had already happened 100 times before. "I don't know where this goes," she said. "Neither do I." The honesty hung there, raw and bare, until she smiled faintly, the kind that means you've already made peace with the consequences. And in that fragile, rain-soaked stillness, something between us shifted, not lust, not regret, but recognition. We weren't hiding anymore. We both knew it couldn't stay, but for that moment, it finally was. Variant, standard, title, Part 7, the conclusion, after the rain. ID, 64929. The rain had stopped by morning, though the streets still shimmered with puddles and reflections. I woke to the faint smell of coffee, not mine. She was in the kitchen, barefoot, hair damp from the shower, wearing my shirt like it was the most natural thing in the world. Neither of us said good morning. We didn't need to. The silence was soft this time, not tension, not hesitation. Just quiet. She poured 2 cups, slid one across the counter to me. "You don't have milk?" she said. "I don't mind it black." She smiled faintly. "Of course you don't." We stood there for a while, sipping coffee that had already gone lukewarm, pretending the world outside the window wasn't waiting to judge us. When she finally spoke again, her voice was steady. "I used to think people our age stop feeling things this strong," she said. "That we just learned to live quieter." I looked at her, really looked, and saw what she meant. The small lines near her eyes, the way she held herself like she was still half bracing for impact. "Maybe we just stop letting ourselves want it," I said. She met my gaze, a mix of pride and something fragile. "And what happens when you start again?" I stepped closer, setting my cup down beside hers. "You remember why it's worth the noise." Her laugh was soft, uncertain. She reached out, fingers brushing mine, slow, deliberate, as if testing if it was still allowed. I took her hand, intertwining our fingers. She didn't pull away. "It's strange," she murmured. "How something that felt wrong can feel this right in the morning." "It's not wrong anymore," I said. "It's just real." She tilted her head, eyes searching. "And what about when people start talking?" "Let them," I said simply. "They don't know what it's like to finally find someone who looks at you like this." Her breath caught, a tiny sound, but it said everything. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against mine. Her skin was warm, her hair smelled like rain and soap. "I was so sure I'd ruin this," she whispered. "Maybe we both did," I said. "And it still turned out okay." She smiled, eyes closing, and for a long moment we just stayed like that. No hurry, no performance, no fear. Just 2 people who had finally stopped pretending. When she finally stepped back, she kept holding my hand. "So, what now?" I looked out at the clearing sky, a faint light spreading across the buildings. "No," I said. "We stopped standing behind doors." She laughed, quiet but real this time, and squeezed my hand once before pulling me gently toward the couch. The record player was still sitting by her door from the night before. She set the needle down. The same song began to play, slow, imperfect, familiar. And when she leaned against me, her head on my shoulder, I knew we'd already made our choice. We weren't hiding anymore. Just breathing. Together.